Goeiedag, good day, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world.
I've been looking around for salvation. I've been looking around for the truth. All around me I see frustration, and I looked all over till I found you. I sit and listen to your stories, and you're telling me, please don't worry. A lot in this world you should know, and love in life is where you should go. If you're looking for somewhere to go, if you're looking for someone to know, if you're looking for someone to guide you, then love in life will guide you.
Goeienaand, good evening, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world. Wow, what a day. As the year 2020 closes out, there is one great truth: the world will never be the same again. Early in January, a virus called COVID-19 was identified by health experts, and by March, most of the world was in lockdown, destroying the economy of many states and impacting the middle class the most. Just a few days ago, America voted for its president going forward for the next 4 years, and in what appears to be blatant voting fraud benefiting Joe Biden, he has just been elected. Believe it or not. Here we go. There are the results: 270 to win, Joe Biden 273. And confirmation of this on television in America, which I'll play for you now.
The physical representation as we talk about unifying the country right now. These are the steps of the Pennsylvania State Capitol here in Harrisburg. And as our camera zooms in, what you're going to see is down at the bottom of the steps, you have pro-Trump supporters who insist this election has been stolen, that there has been voter fraud here in Pennsylvania and across the country. And up at the top of the steps, we have a growing number of pro-Biden supporters who are celebrating, saying this is the result of 4 years of hard work and the result of every vote being counted. And when I talk to some of these demonstrators, particularly the pro-Trump demonstrators, George, and I think about how Joe Biden might have to try to unify the country, I don't know what would happen to sway these Trump supporters other than President Trump himself conceding. Because when I ask them about this election being stolen, they will tell me outright they don't believe any politician, Republican or Democrat, other than President Trump and his most steadfast supporters. I can also tell you that these allegations of widespread fraud typically do not go past the fact that they think that mail-in ballots that were received after Election Day are going to be counted here, which aren't part of this tally right now. Still, these demonstrators are growing by the minute here. I can tell you that police are very cautious right now. So far, there's a layer of about 10 steps separating these groups. But as tense as it has been across the country, it's playing out right here now on the steps of the Capitol, George.
Thank you, Trevor.
Okay, now, I don't know what to say. Biden has apparently won, according to the media. Now, Biden is a worst-case scenario, as this man, nearly in his 80s, is clearly out of his depth, and his vice president, Kamala Harris, is a socialist to the left of Bernie Sanders. This does not bode well for the world. Now, in a moment, I'm going to be bringing on my guests. But before I do, I want to show you a video of what Biden had to say about South Africa back in 1986. Let me just play that video for you.
Come on, man. That's like saying you, before you got in this program, you take a test where you're taking cocaine or not. What do you think, huh? Are you a junkie?
By the way, this is my little sister, Valerie, and I'm Jill's husband.
Let's play. Just shows what a junkie is.
This is my wife. This is my sister. They switched on me.
But I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black.
There is not a single solitary reason in the world why, as I said, we shouldn't be in a position that everybody, and that's my wife, Jill. Hey, Jilly, I'm Jill's husband, actually.
And Corn Pop was a bad dude. And he ran a bunch of bad boys. And I did. And back in those days, you show how things have changed.
Play the radio. Make sure the television, make sure you have the record player on at night. The phone. Make sure the kids hear words.
We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men and women created by you know the thing.
Because if you could take care, you were a quartermaster, you can sure and hell take care of running a department store thing, where in the second floor of the ladies department. You know what I mean?
Well, I'm sick and tired of smart guys.
The rapidly rising I don't know. You ever been to a caucus? No, you haven't. You're a lying dog-faced pony soldier.
Why attack Sanders? Why?
You're getting nervous, man. What kind of country we're going to be? 4 more years of George, he's going to find ourselves in a position where if Trump gets elected, we're going to be in a different world.
Lie after lie after lie after lie.
We have to come together. That's why I'm running. I'm running as a proud Democrat for the Senate.
And by the way, I sit on the stand, and it get hot. I got hairy legs that turn blonde in the sun. And the kids used to come up and reach in the pool and rub my leg down so it was straight, and then watch the hair come back up again. They'd look at it. So I learned about roaches. I learned about kids jumping on my lap. And I've loved kids jumping on my lap.
Barack and I think it's a right for people to have bad care. We have to do at least several things. One, we have to depend on what the president's going to do right now. And first of all, he has to wait till the cases before anything happens. Look, exacerbating the need for environmental justice. Sorry, as a bug.
Folks, we got a lot of work to do. I don't even need you to get me elected.
It's a case where we cannot let this. We've never allowed any crisis from the Civil War straight through to the pandemic of 17, all the way around 16. We have never let our democracy take second fiddle. We can both have a democracy and elections and at the same time correct the public health.
Everywhere I've been hearing all around the country. You're trying your best, but it never feels like enough.
And here comes the train that he tried to make sure didn't continue to run.
No, that's the commuter. All right. No, that's what.
But folks, look. Anyway, I am very willing to let the American public judge my physical and mental my physical as well as my mental fitness.
I'll lead an effective strategy to mobilize true international effort to pressure.
Okay, you can see from that video that clearly something ain't right, especially that closing piece where you saw a Biden rally and you saw a Trump rally. There's something very, very strange going on in America. That's why so many people think this election is a fraud. Now, tonight, my guests are Rasool Snyman, who's having apparently some internet connection problems at the moment, so we'll just see if we can get him on. But he is an author, filmmaker, social and political commentator, political activist, entrepreneur, founder of the anti-treason movement, and Yusuf Ismail, a regular on this channel. Tomorrow night, I will have Dr. Peter Hammond on live at 8 p.m. to follow up on the presidential election and what a Biden presidency could mean to South Africa. Please remember to subscribe to be kept informed and ask any questions you might have in the side chat. Let me get our guests on.
Hello.
Hi, Yusuf. How are you?
How are you? I don't seem to be able to see you. I don't know if you could see me on your
No,
screen.
I can't see you, but my camera's been stolen by the streaming software, so you won't see me, but you'll hear me. But I can't see you, Yusuf.
Okay. And now you can. Now you can.
Now I can. That's much better.
Slightly better. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Now, is Rasool still having problems with his internet?
Let me just try and put the main light on. I want to put the main light on so we don't have a problem here.
Okay, I'll see if I can get Rasool in the meantime.
Okay, sure. Hold on a second.
Sure.
I think it's a problem here. Okay. I think from what I can see, Rasool's still got some problems.
Yeah.
And from what I can understand, there's I think his rotor is down. His rotor seems to be down, and Wi-Fi in some parts of this country are a bit problematic.
Yeah,
so I think that's the.
I'll just give it a go anyway.
Sure, definitely.
Okay, here we go. Okay, let's just kick off the discussion. First off, you've probably heard that Joe Biden has won the election in America.
Yeah, no, I did. In fact, I saw the news. I've been following. I just saw, I was busy in training this afternoon, so I saw something at about 5 o'clock that he had something like 290 electoral college votes. That's not. I think in terms of percentage-wise, what had happened was that you're looking at about 49 and 50%. And then the problem, in the U.S. elections is that the winner of the election is determined through a system called the Electoral College.
Yeah.
So each of the 50 states, is given a certain number of what they call Electoral College votes.
Right.
And it's not equally proportioned. And that adds up to a total of 538 votes. And so a candidate needs to win about 270 Electoral College votes to win the election. Now, what this means is that you can have a situation where a candidate could win the popular vote in the sense that a larger proportion of people would have voted for that specific candidate. But the problem is that because of the fact that certain states, like, for example, Florida, which is a key state, I think has something like about 36 electoral college votes, as opposed to, for example, New York City.
It has
some
29.
of the other states. Yeah, 29. I mean,
yeah.
and so, this is actually not democracy as such. Although, so due to these rules, what happens, Scott, is that a candidate can win the election without getting the most votes at the national level. And that's what happened in the last election in 2016, in which Trump won the majority of electoral college votes, though more people voted for Clinton across the United States.
Now, can you move your camera down a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Let me just try and put it down. Would this be better? Would this be fine?
Yeah, that's better, much better. Yeah.
Okay,
much better.
That's fine. Yeah.
Right. Now, look, let's just get into this discussion and understand what's happening here. Yeah. Did Trump's support for a vaccine for COVID-19 sink him? Because he clearly said at his speeches, you've got to have the vaccine, you've got to have the vaccine. And I think that a lot of Americans are very, very concerned about having a vaccine.
I don't think so. I don't actually think so, because, Biden's position in terms of in terms of vaccinations and in terms of, for example, the medical establishment, is not much different. I mean, in fact, he would be possibly, the problem with Trump is that Trump was a man, because of his clear, I mean, this goes back to his apprentice days, because of his clear narcissistic doom loop. He's a man with contradictions. So he says one thing, he does another thing, shoots from the hip, and there's no consistency. I mean, even in the time with when he had Fauci and the other medical members of the establishment next to him when he was having these so-called conferences, you never knew exactly where he was standing. His medical team said one thing, he said another, and there was no consistency. I don't think it's got to do with the issue of the vaccine, and I think we're gonna basically unpack what this means in a general sense, because the perception is that in actual fact one party is better than the other, or the Democrats are better than the other, or the Republicans are better than the other, when in a general sense they're more or less essentially different parts of the very same coin. Now, the problem for Trump is this, and what kind of, in a sense, sank him in the end, is that, despite the flaws of the American democratic system, which is fundamentally flawed in many respects, in modern American history, presidential candidates, even the bad ones, and we had quite a few bad ones, they've been careful to emphasize the so-called legitimacy of the electoral process, the so-called sanctity of democratic traditions, and the kind of common identity as Americans, even in cases where there were actual reasons to fear fraud. For example, Al Gore. You remember the case in 2000?
Yeah, with when, Florida.
There was a case. Yeah, and certainly the case with him and having apparently won, and Bush going to the Supreme Court and so on. But he kept quiet when you had members of the Senate stating and addressing him as president. He simply kept quiet. He didn't say anything. Whereas in the case of Trump, and he didn't come up with much evidence, he was clinging to the claims of vote theft, despite any kind of absence of evidence. But what this election shows, even with Biden, is that the United States, and has been, it remains a country that is bitterly and evenly divided. It's more divided today, than the 3 decades since the last presidential elections. And then the other point is that despite some of the reports which seem to have suggested that Trump was was poised to suffer massive rejection by voters, in actual fact, if you look at there was just a small fraction of the popular vote that really separated Joe Biden and Trump. One view is that he was inconsistent in regards to the so-called coronavirus crisis, which apparently cost hundreds of thousands of lives. But the other point is that, there's an argument made in the Washington Post, and I was reading the report today, that he ran the worst administration in modern U.S. history. Now, I wouldn't necessarily agree with that, because I would say there were many more worse presidents than Trump. The problem with him is that you had someone with no, what I could say, political acumen. Someone that was more akin to, this kind of social media popularity, which he built up over the years through not just simply his businesses, but, his television programs and all of that. That he was more concerned about, and I don't even really know in the end he was concerned about, but how his image was in the popular eye. I mean, one thing you must understand, Scott, is that Trump is part of the establishment, but he doesn't come from the establishment that the Bushes and the Clintons come from. Those were dynasties on their own. So Trump is part of an elitist establishment, but he's not part of their establishment. And so not surprisingly, you could see even, if you looked at the facial reactions and you go back at his inaugural address in 2017, you just look at the facial reactions of Bush and Clinton for that particular matter and so on. He was not part of the club. So that's one thing. He was outside the club, but at the same time, he was part and parcel of an establishment, a corrupt one that comes from, obviously, the New York establishment that was involved in business and real estate and so on. And so, in the end, if you were to look at his downfall, one could make the argument that the man was clearly, he was someone who was a rabble rouser, someone that was essentially a perpetual gas bag. I mean, this is the first time. This is the first time in U.S. history where you have, and all these channels. By the way, the United States channels, ABC, CBS, CNN, they're all propagandists in many instances. But this is the very first time where ABC, CBS, NBC, MSNBC all stopped, shockingly, airing Trump's speech live because it was filled about the lies about the election and vote counting process and so on and so forth.
I have to take
That's
you
never
to,
happened. That's never happened.
I have to take you to task about that, because Trump, in those rallies that he had, which were covered by other channels, in those rallies, he used to point at the media and say, fake news, fake news. And I just listened to a discussion on ABC television, which is one of the major television stations in America. And they were talking about the damage that had been done to the reputation of the mainstream media as a result of Trump. And that's what they were protecting. That's why they weren't covering his rallies, because they were seeing Trump on their screens saying CNN is fake news. In fact, there was a rally about a week ago where everybody was shouting back at CNN, CNN is fake, CNN is fake, CNN is fake. And that's why they weren't covering the rallies, because they didn't want their reputations to be damaged. That's my point of view anyway.
Well, you know, Scott, there's one argument to be made in relation that, firstly, American media, by its definition, has always been propagandist. But in a general sense, it's been propagandist for the state. Now, in the case of Trump, I think with the exception possibly of Fox News, most of the major news networks were initially hostile. Now, you know, I'm not here to speak for and on behalf of him because I don't support him. But for a presidential candidate, the general situation is that if you do not get support from the media, even on wrong decisions that you make, invariably, you are going to lose popular support, because the media in many instances, I mean, that's the reason why someone, I mean, a snake like Obama, for example, I mean, with the CNN and all the rest lapped him up, even though, I mean, he was even far worse and more military interventionist than Trump. I mean, there were drone attacks and killings of people in parts of the third world, which
and he got a Nobel Peace Prize after 3 months.
That's the amazing thing. I mean, that's the amazing thing. The thing is, in the case of Trump, whilst there was not a lot of public military interventions taking place directly, but what had happened with him was that he had his proxy client states engaging in massacres. For example, Saudi Arabia and Yemen, the massacres there, the incident of Khashoggi, the Israeli killings that of the Palestinians taking place. So they have the proxy client states happening. So the point is that whilst he was not directly military interventionist as Obama was, there was not much change, not much significant change in terms of what he brought. Now, the issue is this, that on Thursday, this past Thursday, in fact, 2 days ago, they went to court. And in Georgia, what had happened, they had presented a lawsuit that apparently there was some 53 absentee ballots that arrived too late. The judge dismissed the lawsuit because there was no apparent evidence. In Michigan, for example, you had a judge rejected the campaign's request to stop the counting of absentee ballots. In Pennsylvania, for example, a federal judge dismissed a Republican request to halt vote counting in Philadelphia. I mean, you know, if he was speaking about, if he wanted to really take an opportunity, he had 4 years. And I don't see any kind of significant change in the United States in terms of what he did, what he engaged in. I mean, if he was more vocal about the vaccine, if you probably care, maybe there would have been a support structure from one camp. But he was inconsistent. I mean, you know, he's speaking about his own medical expert was laughing at him when he was speaking about getting UV light into COVID-19 patients. He simply went with whatever was convenient for him, as many presidents do.
Yeah,
whether the issue of the vaccine knocked him. Yeah,
I just want to say that you know, when we talk about the mainstream media in America, they are clearly part of what Trump calls the swamp. They are clearly a big part of the swamp. They have no credibility. They do put out fake and biased news because they have their own narrative. The whole of the mainstream media in America is controlled by 6 empires, and they're all in the same boat. Every single television station, apart from a couple, and that's very, very small ones, apart from them, the big ones are all controlled by 6 people or 6 companies, and they are all in the same boat. They're part of the New World Order. That's the message they're pushing. And there's absolutely no question about that.
I don't disagree with that, Scott. And I think this is not happened now. What has simply happened is that the ownership has kind of the kind of centralization, if I call it, the centralization. Just like in entertainment, you've got Disney, which is now the dominant party. All the other movie studios have kind of literally gone out of basically into oblivion. But the thing is, American media has always been biased. But the thing is that in many instances they have always been biased in favor of the state. Since 2017, these past 4 years, this is probably the first time when American media have been going against Trump and the Trump administration.
I'm going to butt in there.
And I would say
I'm going to butt in there.
The reason for that is that Trump could have won them over, and they would have simply channeled his position.
This is where I totally. Hang on.
Basically happened.
This is where I totally disagree with you. The reason the media were anti-Trump was because he was tackling and cleaning out the swamp, and they were part of that. And they didn't want him there because they were being impacted by Trump's policies, and the lobbyists in Washington, D.C. were getting the shits, and their whole little cozy nest had been disrupted by the Trump presidency. And why do they push now for Biden? Because they know they're going to go back to that nice little comfort zone where lobbyists will regain control and the media will have a free ride. That is why they targeted Trump. That's it. Finish and clear. Anyway, please continue.
But the point is that the talk about draining the swamp, I mean, never actually happened. It never actually happened. He spoke about that, but in reality, for example, if you look at he repeatedly told voters in the first election that, for example, he was going to shut down the Environmental Protection Agency. He would repeal the Affordable Care Act. He spoke about the idea that the education department is massive; it can be eliminated. He stated that the federal workforce of 2.8 million employees, a target, declaring you have a tremendous waste, fraud, and abuse taking place. All that was well and good when he said that, but the reality is that there was no draining of the Trump that essentially took place. I mean, the one thing that is quite disturbing, and I mean, it's not that it has changed in a general sense, but if you look at the reports from July 2020, and forget the establishment. In economic news in the United States today, about 751,000 people filed for unemployment. I think it was probably in August, September. 30 million people sought unemployment aid since the pandemic, the so-called pandemic began. And that came as the organization Feeding America warned that the number of people facing food insecurity in the U.S. could rise to over 50 million in the forthcoming years, including 70 million children. Now, the point is, at the end of the day, when you talk about draining the swamp, that's well and good. But when you look at the consequential effects in terms of what life is in the United States, it wasn't good. It wasn't good under the Obama administration. It wasn't good at all under Trump. And I'll tell you, under Joe Biden, it also will not be good, because American presidents, in many instances, to be a really independent candidate, and an associate of mine, Brian Rose from London Real, I don't know if you've heard of him. He wants to stand as London mayor. He's a man that has the courage of the conviction. But the general rule is that to become a president of a country like the United States, you're either there already embedded within the establishment, or some part of you is at least within the establishment. But an outsider, a genuine outsider who has real interest and care for society and for people will never make it. And it's just because the system itself is so rigged. I mean, not just from the perspective of, someone like you, Scott, if you've got the cudgels and even to a certain extent financial backing, But because of the fact that you position yourself in a particular fashion and manner, you cannot become the president. That's how things are in the United States. And that's why I say and make the claim that whether you're a Democrat and whether you're a Republican, you are essentially different sides of the very same coin. One purports to be for the leftists, one purports to be for the people, the Democrats, and the Republicans purport to be conservative for family values and so on and so forth. And now there may be one or few aspects, for example, for example, let's take a look at the issue of abortion. The general position is, amongst many Christian fundamentalists in the United States in 2016 voted for Trump because he was, in a sense, gave or exhibited a tendency or trend of being anti-abortion and kind of pro-life. But the reality is the man was far from that in a personal capacity. What happens is that you've got people who come on board, take certain positions, and then they buy into what some people want. And when you have that, you can tap into the consciousness of people, and the people will then believe that, look, you have their interests at heart, and that's how they essentially vote you. That's how the entire dirty game of politics operates. Don't think for a moment that Joe Biden, Donald Trump, Barack Obama, George W. Bush really have the interests of the people at heart. That's a charade. That's
Yusuf,
a facade.
Yusuf,
that's what they want people to
I
believe.
just want to get a word in sideways here. And a little while back, you talked about the impact of the coronavirus on Trump. Now, Trump makes the point that when he shut down international flights from China because this virus had just appeared in America, guess who called him xenophobic? Joe Biden, for shutting down those flights. Now, Trump did the right thing, and he always said that if he hadn't done it, this, whatever it is, I think it's just the flu, but that's my own point of view. Whatever it is, I think this whole thing is a scam. But look, hang on, I haven't finished. I haven't finished, please. I want to get back to the impact of Biden's election on South Africa. We've talked about him, Trump, and we talked about Biden. Let's now, what do you think is going to be the main impact of a Democrat Biden presidency on people in South Africa?
In my opinion, I don't know if you played the clip on Joe Biden, which you said you did or were going to in 1985 when he was, I think, a senator. My position would be, is that it would be one of indifference. There would be nothing significant, no significant change that would essentially happen. The issue is this, is that there has been within the United States, among U.S. presidents, Donald Trump not excluded, total disregard for Africa as a continent, total disregard or rather indifference to South Africa. If South Africa had oil of the stakes that you probably would find in the region of Afghanistan or what you had in Saudi Arabia, trust me, they would have their backsides here more quicker than you could say Jack Robinson. But the reality is that South Africa in general and Africa, although, you probably have, and I think this is an important point we need to go, is that look at the United States impact on the continent. And one can essentially find is that because of the so-called vacuum that the U.S. has played in Africa over the past decade or so, who's taken the opportunity? China. China has become a major player in Africa long before President Trump came into power. Trade between Africa and China has grown rapidly, I think between $166 billion in 2011. That hasn't flowed down to the African people. It's gone back to China. The wealth, again, like most of these countries come in, they come into the country, they plunder the country, plunder the continent, and the wealth goes back to their country. It doesn't trickle down. People still remain poor here. So China has stepped in where the United States has fallen away. And in many African countries, like South Africa, the United States is no longer a kind of main investor of choice. What has happened as a result of it, it's not just simply with Trump. What has happened is that that's left a gap for a country like China. It's left a gap for countries like Russia and India to so-called ramp up their diplomacy, trade and investment. A huge amount of the country's infrastructure is driven by Chinese companies. Most of the backing comes from Beijing. China, for example, is the country that is building roads or entering into contracts with government, where they're given incentives to build roads, ports, airports all over Africa. And what that does is that it further strengthens the Chinese presence on the continent, not from the perspective of liberating African people, but from the perspective of maintaining control, kind of a colonial project in reverse.
Okay.
And all this happens in exchange for resources, friendship, political and economic influence. So you asked me the question, what will Biden do for Africa? My response would be, just like Trump, a total benign disinterest in Africa. There will be no major significant change for the African people, for South Africans in general, or for the masses of the country. And where dictatorships, in fact, exist, they will just simply continue as normal.
Okay, well, let me just dig in. Well, let's go down the rabbit hole a bit, shall we? With Trump.
Please, let's do. I love that.
With Trump, he talked about farm murders in a tweet, that infamous tweet where he said, white farm murders got to stop. And then you had Ramaphosa going out there and saying there are no white farm murders, which is clearly a lie. And now the common view was that if Trump got in for another 4 years, he would have focused his attention onto the minority white population, the minority Indian population, the minority colored population, and given people who've been impacted by this racist, corrupt, gangster ANC government, given those minority groups a way of getting into America, and with a focus on the farmers. So we're talking here about the potential of farmers or people who are victims of farm attacks having a pathway into America where they could set up farms. And that there are lots of people who are saying, hey, we would love to have South African white South African farmers here amongst us, because it would build our communities. They're Christian, they've got the same conservative values as we have, etc., etc., etc. Now, when you come to Biden, he won't care a damn about the minority groups in South Africa. What are your views on that? Because this is a major point of difference.
Well, let's unpack what you said. Farm murders haven't just happened yesterday or day before yesterday or in 2019 or 2018. Farm murders and murders in general in this country have been going on for more than a decade. Some would argue as close to 2 decades. You agree with me?
I would also say that Julius Malema has been stirring up the pot, and he's making it worse.
Definitely, and we've kind of unpacked him in the past. But I mean, in 2017, when Trump came to power, he well knew. I don't know if he did know, because the question about his knowledge is subject to question about other parts of the world. But Trump would have known, if that was his concern, that let's look at one figure: farm murders has apparently happened. It's something of concern. And then he articulated that view. John Stremelau, in relation to that, he's the international relations lecturer at Witwatersrand University. He basically pointed out, not only in relation to this, but in relation to others, that if that was indeed so, why is it that in the 4 years, Trump, if he was so concerned, he hasn't traveled to South Africa? If he was re-elected, it will be doubtful that he'd visit the continent itself. And as Africa ponders Trump's impact on the continent, one strong sign was Trump's administration's move to block funding. I mean, the point is that let's assume that is an issue of concern, farm murders, amongst many other issues. What practical actuality has he done? I was speaking to Simon Roach, and I disagree with Simon from St. Londoners. I had a program with him. When was it? Way back in 2019 on my show, and he went to the United States on a lecture tour, trying to and I differ with St. Londoners on. He went to the United States trying to create awareness about what was happening from his perspective in terms of, for example, the minorities and so on. They couldn't get. Other than certain groups, for example, he was offered, and you can speak to him, someone from the KKK, David Duke, contacted him, David Duke. But they couldn't get a footing with the U.S. administration. I mean, the point is he had 1 or 2 media opportunities in the United States, but in terms of the actually going and seeing the administration or major figures of the administration, they couldn't get in. So what I'm saying, Scott, is that a lot of the talk that people have, like, for example, yes, we can, like Obama stated, or Trump says, make America great. A lot of this is empty talk, empty rhetoric. And in order to create, for example, the continuous support, one must bear in mind that within the support that he has in the United States, a lot of those, some of them, for example, are aware of the fact of the issue of farm murders and farm killings and so on. And this obviously has invariably come to his attention. And so what he's going to do is essentially parrot that same mantra. But it doesn't now mean that he for himself has any kind of concern about farm killings, about the state of Africa. If that was the case, why is it that the Trump administration blocked funding, not just to Africa? I mean, for example, look at Lesotho. If you use Lesotho as a microcosm, and many other parts of Africa, unwanted pregnancies, there's been a 40% increase in abortions in African countries. They've been linked to America's decision to block U.S. federal funding for NGOs that provide abortions and counseling for termination of pregnancies. Now, our situation is different. There's unfortunately in Africa women and girls who are getting pregnant. That's a tragedy. It's a travesty of what is happening. And the reality is that NGOs that sometimes have to provide you can't have a 12-year-old giving birth to a child. It's shocking. This is what is happening in Africa. But these NGOs are blocked by the United States. It was introduced as policy by Donald Trump. And the ripple effect is that many women who live in countries that heavily depend on foreign aid have had to basically lose out. It's not just the loss of contraception. For example, the loss of U.S. funding over the past decade. Since Obama, by the way, it happened under Obama and certainly continued under Trump, has led to cuts in other services such as HIV testing, cervical cancer screening. When funding from the U.S. was cut, it means that people that NGOs are providing services to were left abandoned. And so the impact of Trump's administration decision to cut funding has been felt in sub-Saharan Africa more than in any part of the world. So you raise a point about coming back to the issue of farm murders. Whilst that is an important issue, and whilst he may have articulated on a once-off occasion, that is certainly and most definitely not a concern for Trump in any way, shape, form, or size. It's just like Biden. I don't know if you showed the clip earlier on in Biden in '85 when he was apparently lambasting the U.S. government for supporting apartheid. Don't for a moment think that Joe Biden was somehow or the other a great, phenomenal anti-apartheid activist. I mean, the man is fundamentally corrupt to the core. He's got no qualms about people dying. When he was the deputy president under Obama, he backed and supported drone strikes on people in the third world who are getting massacred and killed. I mean, this is a killer in another disguise. There's no difference in relation to that. So I would question certainly any politicians in general, Trump, but any politician for that particular matter, who plays into the charade of kind of articulating certain concerns that people have and then believe that there's going to be any kind of significant change. I mean, what has Trump done? He's a billionaire. He supports, he's created an empire. He has his children running his administration. He ran, we could call it successful apprenticeship. Whether it's successful is another issue. The point is that the presidency was just simply another step for him in the limelight. I mean, don't for a moment believe that him or Joe Biden or Barack Obama. I mean, the one thing that hits me all the time when I come into cross politicians is the narcissistic quality that these individuals have. True people who are really and genuinely concerned about society in general are either eliminated or never come to the top. It doesn't happen. Because as I think an associate of mine, David Icke, you may have heard, and he's a conspiracy theorist, he mentioned in the context of the US elections that presidents are not elected. They are invariably always selected.
Okay,
and,
now can I just get us back onto what the question I asked you? Okay, the question was, what impact would Trump or Biden have on South Africa? I want to keep to that. I don't want to go all over the place. Now, I want to tell you a story, and you can actually look this up on YouTube. There was a black African lady who put up a YouTube video clip just last week saying, "Yay, I've been able to migrate to Australia." And she explained how she got to migrate to Australia. And the reason was because her husband was held up in one of these car nabbing jobs with a gun, and they felt threatened. And so they applied for Australian citizenship, and they got it, just like that. He's nothing special. He's obviously under 40, which is one of the key age things. Now, I know there are dozens of South Africans who are basically illegally in Australia right now. They're trying to seek amnesty in Australia, but because they're white, they've all been rejected. Now, this is important because here you had a black family that was given a green light to come to Australia because the husband had been threatened, had the car taken and stuff like that, so they feared for their lives. They were allowed in, but whites who went through a lot worse, I'm talking about people who had farm murders and farm attacks and stuff like that, they're basically going to be sent back home again to South Africa. Now, that is clearly a racist immigration policy in Australia. This is why my question is so important, getting back to Trump v. Biden. I believe that if Trump had got in, there would have been a pathway into America, because other countries in the world seem to have this collective blindness when it comes to people from South Africa who are white coming to their country. It's like, you know, the racist tag is stuck on your back because of what happened over 20 years ago now. And that is why I think this is such an important issue we need to focus on. I believe that Trump would have actually opened the doors for those minority groups, those people, to actually get into the country.
But look, Scott, I mean, for the past 4 years, he hadn't done that. I mean, I don't know what the position with immigration laws now in your country is, and I would believe what you're saying. It's very difficult to get a green card in the United States in any event. There's a whole long, lengthy process. That hadn't been done in the 4 years that he was in power. If the concern was really there, and if he believed that there needed to be an urgent immigration to leave the country of South Africa, and that people needed to get out as quickly as possible, he never facilitated that. He never actualized that to happen, if that was indeed so. And I'm saying that the next 4 years, what I would suggest is not that Biden's going to do anything better, but the next 4 years, if Trump had come into power, he would just simply have been more brazen in his activities, because he would not probably stand for a third election. But I'm saying they had the 4 years. If the concern was that he would have opened it for farmers or people to migrate because they feel they are being oppressed by the rising crime rate in South Africa and murders and so on. That hadn't happened over 4 years. So there was much talk. There was apparently some degree of awareness that apparently came to him, but he never facilitated that process within the 4 years. And I'm saying that you can only judge a person, you judge a person in debate. I involve myself in debate. You judge the person by the last debate that he engaged in. If you want to judge Trump, judge him on this specific issue in terms of what he has done for the 4 years. If he hadn't done that in 4 years, what would make it say or suggest that he's going to now suddenly change over the next 4 years? That was not part of his agenda. I mean, if you look at the election policies, it was very internalized, focal. Even if you look at the debates, that was never part and parcel of his rallying card in terms of focusing on international issues. And I'm saying that not just Trump in general, but people need to realize that there is a total and utter disinterest in countries of the world by the United States, unless and until those countries can be viewed as potentially viable for the United States. I mean, one classic example that comes to mind is, for example, and I don't want to detract, but I just want to bring it up, is Afghanistan under the Soviet Union. When Afghanistan was under Soviet control in 1978-79 under the Carter administration, and by people like Zbigniew Brzezinski, for example, the national security advisor, what was happening? They were funding individuals called the Mujahideen, who were glorified in the Rambo movies and so on, that became some of the most oppressive dictators in Afghanistan, sending the country back into Stone Age. So I think the one point we need to understand, when it comes to power, when it comes to empire, and when I talk about empire, inverted commas, the U.S. empire is premised on the basis in involving itself in other countries in terms of what it can gain, what it can do, what benefit can this particular country do to us? I mean, during the Cold War, the United States, for example, made, and I think this is relevant to today because we're dealing with it today, the US made common cause with many dictators. For example, Batista. You have Anastasio Somoza. You have, for example, Ferdinand Marcos in the Philippines, Mobutu Sese Seko, Augusto Pinochet, even someone like General Suharto in Indonesia. I mean, for heaven's sake, under Henry Kissinger, they backed Pol Pot. Pol Pot was described as, under the rise of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. I mean, they engaged in some of the most brutal genocide of the 20th century in Cambodia. If you look at the document, the year zero.
But
Yusuf, the point is,
we all know why.
I mean, you may know. Of course. I mean, this was viewed as, against the so-called the Soviet threat. For example, when they supported South Africa, when they, for example, supported someone like Augusto Pinochet, who's now sitting in jail, this was convenient for them at that particular stage. When they supported, for example, Saddam Hussein, I mean, many people don't know up to now that Saddam Hussein was a close ally of the United States until he became expendable. Reza Shah Pahlavi of Iran was a close, powerful ally of the United States. I mean, some of the worst dictators in the world. So I think the point being made is that, and tying it up to farm murders or murders in general is harm against people. The assumption sometimes people have, and I'm talking to the viewers out there, not you, Scott, because I would assume you would know it. The assumption people have is that the United States has a benevolent role to play, like the Star Trek Enterprise in terms of helping people in need and desperation. They don't care. When Rwanda was experiencing genocide of the worst kind, where was the United States? No, then they didn't want to get involved. When Kuwait was basically annexed by Iraq, then, of course, they came in because it impacts on the oil supplies. The same thing with what happened in Bosnia-Herzegovina in the 90s, or in Afghanistan for that particular matter. I mean, this is a long list of what I would call hypocritical cynicism in terms of making common cause with dictators, many dictators to count when the need arises. So I think, unfortunately for us as South Africa, we're going to be in a situation where we are in a position of indifference. We need to engage in our own liberation. We cannot look to the United States, to someone like Trump or Biden or Obama, whoever for that matter, as a savior, because at the end of the day, they are there to save their own behinds, not us, not general South African society.
I've given you a huge amount of time. I just want to respond to one of the comments you made. You talked about Pol Pot and Henry Kissinger. Now, it's quite clear to me. It's quite clear to me that Henry Kissinger is part of the elite, the New World Order.
Absolutely.
He's part of that. Yeah. And if you look at George Soros, you look at Open Society Foundation, you look what Black Lives Matter have done in the US, if you look at the indoctrination of the youth in the US, what you've got is a dumbing down of civil society around the world by an elite group of people. And what happened with Pol Pot and Kissinger was just part of disrupting that society. If you look what happened in 1994 in South Africa, yes, I know the apartheid system was wrong, but what the objective of the New World Order was to do is what they've now achieved. They've broken South Africa. Yeah. They've broken it had a fantastic family base. It was a Christian country. They've taken a lot of that away. There's only a couple of small communities that still maintain those old values, which are the Boers and the Afrikaners, and they've maintained those old Christian values. But you take the rest of the population, a large percentage of white South Africans and Indians today live in poverty in South Africa because of the racist economic policies of the ANC government. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because Joe Biden is part of that family, the elitist New World Order family. So you're not going to get anything at all coming the way of South Africa from him, because the more disruption, the more chaos there is in South Africa, the easier it is for a one world government to come in and have the great reset. Now, do you have any argument with what I've been saying?
Well, I mean, firstly, South Africa is not a Christian country as such. I mean, and even during the apartheid government, although there was a kind of a Calvinistic variety of Christianity that underpinned the South African government, and some would obviously object to that. I mean, we've got different religions and backgrounds. I, for one, for example, come from a Muslim background.
Right.
And I believe that the values and ethics of Islam can shape and reshape South African society as much as a Christian would do the same. The thing, speaking about Joe Biden, I don't know, again, if you play about Joe Biden, where he was lambasting, I think, the Secretary of State, George Shultz, in 1985. What had happened in the United States is that Richard Nixon, and you speak about Henry Kissinger, in relation to apartheid South Africa, they adopted a policy, what was known as the tar baby option, according to which, at that stage, the U.S. did in fact maintain close relations with the white rulers in South Africa. In fact, what had happened was that the Reagan administration evaded international sanctions and provided diplomatic support in international forums for the South African government. There was an increase in trade for the South African government. The Reagan administration, for example, vetoed the Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Act, which mandated compliance by the U.S. with the international sanctions and increased distance between two governments. The thing is that what happened in 1994 and the 1990s is that the fact that the anti-apartheid movement in the United States and certainly within popular culture had gained such a momentum, it became inconvenient for the United States government to simply continue its policy. And I'm saying that the same people who you say are the so-called New World Order, we can call them the global elite, that gave us what happened in 1994, or the fall of the Berlin Wall, or the so-called collapse of Soviet Russia in the 1990s, people that were the architects of 1994 were the very same people that actually provided the support to the apartheid government. I mean, I must just explain this particular policy. Tar Baby, it's called the Tar Baby option. You can check this up. This is an allusion, and I don't want to take too much of time on this issue, but this is an allusion to the story of Brer Fox, in which he tries to capture Brer Rabbit by making a tar baby. And then Brer Rabbit strikes the tar baby with his hands and then eventually becomes completely adhered to it. And what happened was that tar baby was a policy given to the U.S. Department by Richard Nixon, to Richard Nixon's policy in the 1960s and 70s, where they wanted to strengthen control and build up the allies with the United States government. According to Nixon, for example, if the United States was to be an influence for any sort, it would have to do so by offering the carrot, in a manner of speaking, and kind of doing away with the stick. And the same thing happened under Margaret Thatcher. Let me tell you something. Although they speak about being anti-apartheid and against apartheid, the U.S. government under Ronald Reagan, the British government under Margaret Thatcher, fully supported the apartheid government. Let's ourselves with that. People now want to portray the idea that they were pro or anti-apartheid and so on. The United States supported apartheid. The British government supported apartheid. Many countries in Europe supported apartheid. They now create the change or the perception that they are anti-apartheid because it's not politically correct to do so. I mean, up until 1998, I think, or 2008, Nelson Mandela was still theoretically viewed as a terrorist. Obviously one can make the argument about the ANC being a terrorist organization today in terms of what's it's engaged with, corrupt and racial and racist policies and destructive policies. But let's not fool ourselves by admitting the fact that the Reagan administration on numerous occasions evaded international sanctions and provided diplomatic support in international forms of the South African government. Now, Joe Biden was speaking out against that conveniently because he was from the opposition at that particular stage as a senator in 1985. But had he been in the camp of Reagan and had he been in the camp of Republicans, he would have trumped the very same agenda. So it's convenient that you are either. It's not a question of you either with us or for us. This is the main aim of the political cynicism that has essentially veered and steered U.S. government policy not just towards South Africa but towards the rest of the world. So I think that's the key issue. Liberation governments can point to real and enduring achievements, but the most basic freedom, the freedom to survive, the freedom to survive decently has been withheld from the majority of South Africans. And what happened in 1994, as you've mentioned in your Scott, is that there was going to be a liberation taking place. There was a perception that there was going to be significant change. There was a perception that poverty would somehow or the other be eradicated, and the lives of millions would in fact be changed, and that millions of houses would have been built, and a better health and education system would have been possible in South Africa, or small-scale credit system could have opened the way for affordable goods and services for the majority. But none of that has happened. None of that has happened over time. And that is a shame for us. And America will not change it. No other country will change it. We have to change it ourselves. I mean, Mandela said, if the ANC does not deliver the goods, we need to do to it what we did to the apartheid regime.
Okay. Now Yusuf, I just want to raise a really important point here. Yeah. What we haven't talked about is Joe Biden's running mate, Kamala Harris. Now, Joe Biden is clearly got some issues. He's an old guy. He's in his late 70s. He's the oldest president ever. Hang on, let me finish.
Absolutely.
Let me just finish.
Yeah.
He's an old guy. He's in his late 70s. Now, Kamala Harris is left of Bernie Sanders. She will bring in socialist ideals into America, which is going to totally undermine what is the world's strongest capitalist country. Now, that's going to have a huge impact on the world, and it's going to be hugely beneficial to China, because China's there waiting in the wings. That China would love what's just happened now, and it's going to open the doors for China to basically take over and colonize Africa, because America will be fighting with itself. I can't see anything else but civil war happening in America. Now, what are your thoughts about Joe Biden's health and having Kamala Harris as a vice president?
Well, in respect to Joe Biden's health, I mean, he's extremely old. He's 78, and I mean this. Some say he's inarticulate. If you look at the clip and you look at how he performed in the presidential debate, he clearly not someone that thinks on his feet. He's not that articulate. Some would argue that there's a ability of senility that has base. I mean, it's quite, in my opinion, someone of that age should be at home playing with his children or grandchildren, great-grandchildren, not trying to run a nation like the United States. I always believe that perhaps, just like in our South African government, most of the members of the administration are in their 60s and 70s. I mean, that's when you retire. Every other job in the world, you retire at 65. Every other government job, you go on pension, except within government itself or running government, you only retire when you die, or you can go on until 70. So I think he's firstly extremely old. He's not sharp mentally. I don't know if he'll last. He'll be about 81 or 82. At the end of his first term. I doubt he'll run the second term. I wouldn't trust his vice presidential candidate, Kamala Harris, to tell you the time. And I normally, and this is my personal views, I judge a person. She may well do what you have claimed to do. And whether China is a communist state, I would say not. They would be probably communist in terms of the way they treat their population, but they are hardcore capitalists in terms of how they are making money and wanting to take over the rest of Africa and other parts of the world. No, absolutely. But I'm saying is that when you talk about communism, generally speaking, we can talk about it from the economic perspective or from the perspective of control. So they operate as a communist Stalinist dictatorial regime when it comes to the population. When it comes to corporate, I would say more particularly what you would see is corporate fascism. It's corporate fascism that you see in China, just like you would see in the United States. And I would say that Kamala Harris would be an embodiment of that. I would say the correct term would be corporate fascism, where money's basically trickled down to selected elite, and what you've got is technocrats that essentially run the show. And she would simply embolden that to happen. I would normally judge candidates based on how they view the rest of the world, how they view the rest of society. And one thing which was quite surprising, Kamala Harris, she's actually Indian, by the way. I wasn't aware of that. But I think she's of mixed ancestry. She's of
part Indian and part European, I think.
Yeah, part Indian, part somewhere along the line, whatever the case is. I was actually surprised. I judge a person based on how they operate on foreign policy in relation to the rest of the world. And one thing which was quite surprising to me, just a few weeks before the election, was Kamala Harris's reiteration from Joe Biden that the United States will not impose any form of conditions on U.S. aid, for example, to Israel, saying that the assistance, for example, in terms of the selling of arms, or for example, the U.S. aid would not be linked to any kind of political decision made by the Israeli government. What that essentially means is that Harris told a virtual fundraiser with Jewish American voters, and this is just simply to buy the Jewish American support. The Jewish American support is extremely strong in the United States. They are part of the Jewish lobby. You cannot become president of the United States if you don't have the support of the Jewish lobby. And what Kamala Harris made it clear to the Jewish lobby, AIPAC, the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, that there would be unwavering support and security assistance, including the selling of arms and funds up to $8.5 billion to any political decision that Israel makes. And this just simply continues the so-called unwavering support, which happened in the Bush administration, which happened in the Obama administration. She made the comment, and I just checked it up now, that I pledge to you, this is what she said, I pledge to you, to Netanyahu, the Biden-Harris administration will sustain our unbreakable commitment to Israeli military, including the unprecedented military and intelligence cooperation pioneered during the Obama-Biden administration, and guarantee that Israel will always maintain its qualitative military edge. What does that do? That basically claims, in a sense, it restructures again in a hostile environment what's going on in the Middle East. It just simply continues the hostility we've seen for more than 6 decades in the Middle East. Israel receives about $3.8 billion of U.S. military aid annually, more than the population itself. Before leaving office in 2016, Obama signed a memorandum of understanding that ensured $38 billion of Israel spread over 10 years. Bernie Sanders, somehow or the other, proposed the imposition of human rights conditions, but Harris now, 5 weeks before the elections, and not surprisingly before the American Israeli Public Committee, in order to gain the Jewish support, stated that they're completely ruling out using military aid as leverage to advance U.S. policy, including, so they don't care whatever happens. So long as they get their support, they don't care. And this basically shows is that not just Palestinians are wiped out of history, not just people in Africa are wiped out of history, but anyone who's got the financial and political muscle to boost an individual candidate to the status of U.S. presidency will get the particular support, whether you call yourself a Trump or a Joe Biden or any other person. And so Kamala Harris is someone I would absolutely not trust. Harris and Biden are the so-called, they call themselves the Democratic Party as the so-called leftists and the Republicans as the so-called right. That's absolute rubbish. That's hogwash. There's no far right and far left. They're both different sides of the repulsive, same rotten coin that you see essentially that happens. And whether there are crimes committed in Israel or crimes committed in Africa or crimes committed against the own U.S. population or crimes against white farm murders, all that is insignificant so long as you get the support by your supporter base and structure, which is the corporate elites. You can't get U.S. presidential support without the corporate elites or the technocrats that are essentially running the show. Right. So if you're asking me about Joe Biden and Harris, I wouldn't trust them and view them with any degree of respect from above. So
I just want to move on to 2021, okay? Mm-hmm. And this will impact South Africa as well. What they're now talking about is the reset in the world. Now, this is just a hypothesis. It's a conspiracy theory, but it is kind of unfolding slowly in the background. And what I'm talking about is all these states, like in Africa, you've got the African Union, where you've got all 51 states which are now in the African Union. You've got here in Australia, you've got the Australian, I think it's called APEC or something like that. But it's
in Australia, you've got the Asian Pacific Economic Forum, right?
Yeah,
That's what it's called.
And APEC, and you've got New Zealand in it. You've got all these other countries around Australia which are part of this one union. And what they're saying, this is a theory. what they're saying is that the Great Reset will be because of the economic damage done to the states, all these states, because of the COVID-19 virus. What they're going to do is they're going to have basically like an overruling body, like they've got in the European Union, in these different, like the African Union, APEC, etc., which is going to bring down the number of effective governments, because they will be the European Union, to about 10 in the world, which is moving towards this one world government. Now, have you heard of that theory, and what are your thoughts on that?
I have certainly, and it's not a new theory. It's not in fact a theory. If you look at how the world operated, I mean, and I'm talking about way back in 2000, not just now. You had, for example, the OAC, the Organization of African Cooperation. That changed and became the African Union. You had the European Common Market, if you recall. I mean, I was still very small in the 80s, but you heard of the Common Market. That became the European Union. You had, for example, there was something which they were talking about in the United States called NAFTA.
That's called
North
USMCA.
Agreement. USMCA, or as they wanted to call it some time back, the American Union. So you had the American Union, the European Union, the African Union, of course, in countries like Australasia, that's New Zealand, parts of, obviously Japan and China would fall under that. Strangely enough, with Australia, you'd have what they would call the Asian Union. So you've got Asian Union, American Union, European Union, African Union, and all about it is the idea, for example, the theory behind the global reset is also got to do with the issue of currency, like they've introduced the euro in the European Union, which the UK government has obviously, they've never agreed to that in any. But what it would essentially mean is that the existing currency, and for example, in relation to the United States, they would lose its position as a reserve currency, because the argument would be made that the US is overly leveraged and becoming less competitive compared to resource-rich emerging economies. And so what would happen as a result of this is that as the value of the currency in general is kind of a barometer of people's trust in government and its ability to repay debts. If there's no trust, and you don't have the money, and what you have instead is a kind of a collection of dead portraits of portraits of long dead presidents. And if that happens, that would unbalance the system, because what it would essentially mean is that there would be a new currency in operation. There's certainly a high significant amount of debt, which in most instances, the debts by the bank, for example, are covered by the government. This goes back to the whole issue of the Federal Reserve Bank and the fact that the US is indebted in a currency that at the same time it has a sole monopoly to print at its own discretion. And so what I would see is that, I don't know if this is going to happen, but there has been talks about this, about the introduction of a new currency, about the introduction of a new system, a single kind of judicial legislature, which in a sense has happened. I mean, because if you look, for example, at the Rome Statute, which is a body which many governments are either signatories or not, or many of these tribunals that were set up in Africa, like the Rwanda Criminal Tribunal and so on, to deal with what had happened in Rwanda, they were just simply stepping stones for a situation and a phenomenon in terms of which you have a single legal system and a single currency that essentially would control society. Now, the funny thing is that people have been saying that this is going to happen over the last 50 years. It hasn't happened as quickly as people have essentially predicted. But what you can see again and again is a total, what's the actual centralization of power and centralization of control. I mean, when did who would have thought that a powerful currency like the Deutschmark would just simply disappear? Who's ever heard? Can you even operate with the Deutschmark, or, for example, the Italian lira, or the franc for that matter. No, they're unheard of now. I mean, it's like ancient history.
Yeah.
And there will come a time when, excuse me, I'm also suffering from a slight flu. There will come a time where I believe that you will have a single currency for every single, and eventually, possibly, a situation which goes to indicate that, look, if a single currency can work for every continent, why not just simply globalize this and allow a situation for a single currency for the entire world, or just simply reduce currency to, for example, I don't know what's there in the system, electronic currency, electronic means, where you just simply have money in the bank and paper money, which in the packet actually is not really money, but paper money goes out of circulation entirely. That could possibly happen. And I mean, nobody predicted the euro.
That will happen. They're going to get rid of currency.
It's a question of time.
Sorry, they're going to get rid of fiat. They're going to get rid of banknotes and that sort of stuff. It's all going to be digital.
Paper money is not money. Yeah, absolutely. Paper money is not money, by the way. You know, paper money has never been real wealth, but they're going to get rid of that as well. Yeah. They're going to get rid of that because whenever a bank prints money, whenever a bank gives you a loan, 100,000 or 2 million, it doesn't print new money. It just simply types figures on a screen, which are then basically put into your account. And when you can't pay back, what they do, they come and take away real wealth, which is your house, your property, your other assets, and so on and so forth.
It's a scam.
It's dangerous. It's an apocalypse. It's an apocalypse that's probably going to happen. I don't know, and I hope it doesn't. We need to speak out against it and make people aware of not going down that route.
All right. Now, I want to, on this very subject, are we seeing a fulfillment of Orwell's 1984 right now?
Well, you know, I don't know how many people have read 1984 and what 1984 actually started for. By the way, you know, George Orwell, his real name was not, in fact, George Orwell.
Sorry, guys, we got a bad link here.
Back then he was, and Orwell's 1984, and subsequently a far more better book, which I read as a child, which was far more easier reading, was Animal Farm.
Yes.
But what Orwell's 1984, Animal Farm. But what Orwell's 1984 is, it's a kind of a dystopian social science fiction that centers on the consequence. And I urge your viewers to get Orwell's 1984 and see what's going on in society. What it does, it centers on the consequences of totalitarianism, mass surveillance, repressive regimentation of persons and behavior within a society. Orwell himself was a democratic socialist, by the way. He was a democratic socialist. And so he modeled the authoritarian government in the novel back then, basically, for what he saw on what they believed to be Stalinist Russia. But I think it's more than that. I think he knew the agenda, he knew the game, and he knew more about what was coming or what was going to come than what he basically was purported to know. And there are things in the novel, for example, things like, for example, Big Brother, which we use today. Nobody knows where Big Brother comes from. It actually comes from Orwell. Double think, thought crime, newspeak, where basically you've got this massive monitor screen that is giving you information, just like we see today.
Indoctrination.
Double speak, where war is truth, war is peace. You know, that famous freedom is slavery, and so on and so forth. The opposite of what you see. And whilst it's a fictional novel, whilst it has a story, the central thesis is what can essentially happen with a society that basically is given full perpetual control over over humanity at large. And if you look at some of the themes that are in Orwell's 84, for example, in Aldous Huxley's Brave New World and so on, you see the same situation that happens here. In 1984, what you have is a civilization which is damaged by war, civil conflict, and revolution. The entire world. There's a strip called Oceania, one of the three totalitarian superstates that rules the world. It's ruled by a party, a single party called INSOC, that controls thought of people, and they brutally purge out anyone that does not conform to their regime using the thought police, constant surveillance through hidden cameras and hidden microphones. Look at society today. I mean, look at society. You couldn't make this up. I mean, who would have thought that in 2020 you would have had a situation where the entire world is simply shut down, and anyone who walks outside his house can essentially be charged for a criminal offense. Who would have thought such a thing would have ever happened? I mean, in 2019, we were around in 2019. Who would have thought such a thing would have happened on such a scale and with such brutality as we've seen it here in terms of the creation of the so-called virus that has happened? Unfortunately, when you look at this novel and what you see in society today, you actually see an actualization. In a sense, it's very uncanny in a manner of speaking, because it's like a kind of a fulfillment of prophecy in more ways than one, to the letter. I mean, when you speak about thought control, freedom of speech, the ability to control your movement, where to go, where not to go.
Yeah.
I mean, this is insanity.
Well, I just have to say,
absolute criminal.
I just have to say that under a Biden-Harris presidency, what we're seeing is going to be sped up. There's no question about that. It's going to be fast-tracked. I think what happened when Trump got in was that it kind of put a spoke in the wheels, because he kind of stopped what their plans were. So now they've got to play catch-up, because clearly everything is planned on a timeline. Now, I just want to close off with one question for you, Yusuf, and that is, why has society become so compliant in today's world?
I mean, I did have an answer to that, and I could kind of give you a superficial answer to that. But the reality is that society is, psychologically geared and operates within a trajectory, should the need arise, that whenever there is a danger or a danger that is presented to them, they have to go to someone who will offer them protection. And I think this is the innate trait possibly in every human being. When you're a child and you are told about the boogeyman or the ghost that is going to eat you up if you go outside in the dark, what happens? I mean, I've got a little baby. He never actually, we never brought him up talking about ghosts, but so he can go into a darkened room without so much of fear. But now some of his siblings have inculcated in that him. I think as this is part and parcel of our innate desire, our innate psychology and makeup as humans, unfortunately, that we always turn to those in positions of authority to seek protection, not realizing at the end of the day that it's the same people that you turn to protection that are in fact the greatest enemy that society has created for us. To be truly liberated, you need to liberate yourself. Unfortunately, we as human beings have reached a situation to such a level that, for sheep, when you want to control a sheep, how do you control the sheep? Because sheep on their own, you can't catch a sheep. I've tried to catch sheep. It's difficult to catch a sheep. There's a massive struggle. When they're in a herd, they are far more easier to get. They're far more easier to catch. They're far more easier to touch. And you just have a single sheepdog that controls the sheep. Just one sheepdog that controls the sheep. We humans have out-sheeped the sheep because we don't need a sheepdog. We as sheep basically control each other. So anyone, for example, that goes outside the terrain of what is viewed as conventionally normal is immediately reported and ostracized and condemned and brought into book. I'll give you one small little example in my own life. During the lockdown level 5, I made it a point regularly, and I stay on the south coast in a beautiful town called Luvongo, where I travel to Ikopo, but I stayed near the beachfront. Level 5, I made it a point on a daily basis, level 5, to go down to the beach and walk on the road. On numerous occasions, I'd have a police vehicle just driving past and saying, "What are you doing on the road?" It's not that the police knew, it's that your own people, your neighbors, those around you, on a simple thing like just simply walking down the road, minding your own business, going to the beach for some degree of sanity and peace and contentment, goes and reports you to say, "Look, there's someone out there He's walking on his own. That's a harm, and you need to tell him. And so I've had people basically coming up and the police coming and saying what's happened, and I just continued. Whereas cynically, about 10 kilometers away, you'd have a stream of individuals outside the Department of Home Affairs in South Africa or outside government offices being either given rotten food by the government or receiving their pension, and there was no social distancing. Yeah. This is a cynicism that you have in society.
Yeah,
we
but
are
we're
so
off
easy to control.
We've just gone off the topic a bit here. I just want to get back to the compliance side. And what I've noticed in life, if you look at bees, if you look at white ants, if you look at lions, if you look at just about any species in the animal kingdom or any insect in the insect kingdom, they have a hierarchy. For example, you've got the queen bee, then you've got the fighter bees, you've got the worker bees, and they all have their role. If you look at human society, we got exactly the same situation where you've got, again, a hierarchy, which is the president, then the members of parliament, then you've got et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a fascinating observation to me that regardless of pretty well anything from, as I say, from white ants, you've got the queen white ant, to lions, where you've got the head of the pack. There's this hierarchy right through the animal kingdom, including the human species. Right. Now, I just want to thank...
Can I make one point, Scott?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Could I just make one point on that?
Go ahead.
And I think it's a fascinating point where you use the example of white ants and worker bees. In psychology, compliance, in fact, refers to changing one's behavior due to the request or direction of another person. So, the question people need to ask, have you ever done something you didn't really want to do simply because someone else asked you to do? Buying something as a brand, what influence does it have on our social behavior? Are there factors that impact compliance? And compliance is a major topic of interest within the field of consumer psychology, because that speciality area focuses on the psychology of behavior of human beings, and politicians and leaders do the same thing. And they tap into our inner consciousness, our inner fears, just what we would call the Hegelian dialectic. You create a problem, you get the reaction and the fear from society, and then you foment a solution which the public buy and comply into, and then you have control of society. What we need to engage in is total and utter civil disobedience. You need to stop being acquiescing to government, to establishment in any form and capacity. We need to be more checkered with each other in terms of being better individuals within society, and simply disagree. To hell with government, to hell with some of these rules and regulations that are imposed. But we need to do it collectively, and we need to create the psychology and the mass discourse of inherent civil disobedience within the minds of not just South Africans, but in Australia, in Africa, in America, in other parts of the world.
Right. Now, I've got one question from Charlotte Smith. Actually, I've got a couple of questions here. I'll just sure. Put those to you. Charlotte says, please ask Yusuf, what does he think about the laptop from hell and the corrupt FBI? I think she's talking about Hunter Biden's laptop, which landed up in a workshop and apparently has porn videos and pedophilia and all sorts of stuff in it. And the FBI were given that computer a year ago, and they've done absolutely nothing with it. But unfortunately, Rudy Giuliani has got a copy of the hard drive, and he's now blown the whistle on what's in it. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I haven't studied the case too much, but what I do understand is that apparently there was going to be a prolonged, multi-pronged litigation on several on several fronts, rather, not Trump. What the talk is, some are saying that the pornography that is found is essentially fake. I'm not so sure that it's fake. We don't know. I don't know too much about it. It's possible that, I don't know, was it child pornography that was found on his computer?
Apparently, yes. Look, this is the assumption.
I mean, I wouldn't put it behind people. In fact, I think his son or someone is married to a South African, if I'm not mistaken. Biden's son has some sort of relationship with a South African for that particular matter. It's possible. It's possible that he's been doing it, but I think, obviously from Trump's perspective, this would be something positive for him in terms of criticizing Joe Biden. But I mean, I wouldn't put it behind any of these individuals being behind child pornography. The fact that the FBI is not involved in terms of continuing the investigation, I mean, is nothing new to me. I mean, there's so much of criminal activity. The pedophilia network is so high, not just within the American establishment, but within Hollywood. And the FBI have known about this for a long, long time. And nothing has been done about this, I mean, in other cases. So I'm not surprised that there's not much urgency. And unfortunately, the reality is that those pedophiles who are caught out are those on the lower echelons of society, those low down. The pedophiles high up in the network, I mean, how long does it take for them? I mean, look at someone like within Hollywood, Harvey Weinstein. I mean, the abuse was known for
Epstein?
Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, who was in friends with both Bill Clinton and Trump, and Trump obviously disassociated himself from him after the discovery. But I mean, don't tell me that within the elite circles this was not known, and that abuse of women and human trafficking never went. I mean, this is known for a long, long time. What happens is that when it becomes popularized, when you've got, for example, a whistleblower within there or an abuse victim, then unfortunately it's a bit too late, and that's when the media jumps onto it.
Yeah.
So I haven't studied too much on what happened with Hunter Biden's laptop. I wouldn't put it past him. I wouldn't put it past, if you were to tell me that Biden is a pedophile himself, I wouldn't put it past any of these individuals. I wouldn't trust them in a hurry. So that's my particular take on the issue of the laptop. Yeah. It's not that significant, but I mean, in the sense of perversion, you've got perverts running the scene. That's what we can say.
Exactly. All right. Look, Yusuf, I just want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. I think we covered the impact of Biden now that he's actually been elected, or he's president-elect in the U.S. We know the destiny, and I think that Trump would have been a far more positive outcome for the minority groups in South Africa. I think Biden, as you say, he won't care a damn. Biden is clearly not a well man, or he's far too old to be in the job he is. So I don't know what Americans are thinking. But yeah, we live in very, very interesting times. And as I say, thank you so much for joining us tonight to talk about this subject, about who is a better US president for South Africa. And I just want to turn to the side chat and say to the moderators, thanks, guys, for doing the great job that you do. And for those who've been watching, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I hope you've found it interesting. I've learned a lot, as usual, with Yusuf, and I hope that you guys have too. Please take care. And with that, I'm going to close down the live stream. And guys, please have a good evening. Bye for now.